I had worked the night shift at Turner's convenience store for about 4 months. It wasn't the best job, but it paid the bills, and I didn't have to deal with too many people. The town was small, and most nights were quiet. Drunks, truckers, and the occasional lost traveler were my only company. The store sat near the highway, surrounded by empty lots and old buildings. Across the street, a single streetlight flickered on and off, making everything feel a little more isolated. That night, something felt different. The air was heavier, the silence too deep. At first, I ignored it. Maybe I was just tired. I leaned against the counter, scrolling through my phone, keeping an eye on the empty parking lot. Then I noticed a car. A dark sedan parked across the road, engine off, lights off. Someone was inside, but they weren't moving. They had been sitting there for nearly an hour. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself it was nothing. People pulled over all the time. Maybe they were waiting for someone. But something about the stillness of the car made my skin crawl. I glanced at the security cameras. No one was inside the store except me. The small clock above the cigarettes read 1:43 a.m. 3 more hours until my shift ended. The doorbell chimed. I looked up as a man walked in, hoodie pulled over his head, hands in his pockets. He kept his head down, pretending to browse the aisles. A minute later, another man entered, doing the same thing. They didn't buy anything. They barely looked at the shelves. Instead, they stole quick glances at me. I stayed behind the counter, acting like I wasn't paying attention, but my gut told me otherwise. A woman rushed in next. She looked nervous, her breathing unsteady. She avoided eye contact and walked straight to the counter. "Can I use your phone?" Her voice was shaky. "My car broke down." I hesitated. Something was off. "Yeah, sure." I handed her the store phone. She dialed a number and spoke in hushed tones. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but she kept glancing at the two men. Then, without another word, she hung up and walked out, disappearing into the night. The men exchanged glances. Then, the power cut out. The store went completely dark, except for the dim emergency lights near the entrance. The refrigerators hummed to a stop. The security monitors blinked off. My stomach tightened as I stood frozen behind the counter, gripping the edge. The automatic doors didn't open. The parking lot outside was still empty. The only sound was my own breathing. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving closer. "Hey man," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're having a power issue. If you need something, let me know before I have to close up for the night." No response. I reached under the counter where we kept a metal bat, my fingers brushing against the cold handle. My heart was racing. The emergency lights cast long shadows, making everything look distorted. The two men were still inside, but they weren't pretending to browse anymore. They were standing still now, both facing me. I swallowed hard. "You guys need something?" One of them stepped forward, still keeping his hands in his pockets. He was tall, built like someone who had been in fights before. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "Empty the register." I exhaled slowly. So this was happening. I had thought about this scenario before. We weren't supposed to resist. Give them the cash, stay calm, and let them leave. That's what the training said. But something about this felt different, more calculated, more dangerous. I nodded, keeping my movements slow. I opened the register, pulling out the cash. "Here," I said, placing the bills on the counter. "Take it and go." The second man took a step forward. "All of it." "This is all we keep in the till at night," I said, keeping my voice steady. The first man glanced at the door, then back at me. "Back room. You got a safe, right?" My hands clenched. "We don't keep cash in there." Liar. I knew then they weren't leaving without more. Maybe not even without hurting me. The one closest to me reached into his pocket. I saw the outline of something. Maybe a knife, maybe a gun. My body tensed. That's when the front doorbell chimed again. Someone else had walked in. A man, middle-aged, dressed in a dark jacket. His face was unreadable. He didn't say a word. He just stood there looking at us. It was as if his presence had changed something. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't confused. He was just watching. The taller man shifted uncomfortably. "What do you want, old man?" The man didn't answer. He took a slow step forward, then another. The men exchanged glances. The air was thick with tension. "Let's go," the second man muttered. "Not worth it." "Shut up," the first one snapped. "We're already in." The man in the jacket kept walking, not toward me, not toward the robbers, just toward the back of the store, silent, unbothered. And then, just like that, the two men turned and ran. I stood there stunned as they bolted out the door and disappeared into the night. The dark sedan across the road revved to life and sped off. I turned to the man who had just saved me, my pulse still racing. "Thank you," I breathed. But he was already walking away, past the aisles, toward the back of the store. "Sir?" I called. "Who are you?" No answer. I moved around the counter, peering toward the back where he had gone. The emergency lights flickered, casting strange shadows along the floor. And then I stopped. The back door was locked, and the man was gone. Hi friends, my channel is stuck, and I need your help. Please watch my full videos, like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends to unfreeze it. Your support means everything and will help me bring you more chilling stories. Moving to a new house was never something I had planned so soon, but the daily commute to my office had become unbearable. I spent hours stuck in traffic, drained before my work even began. That's when I decided to look for a house closer to my workplace. After weeks of searching, I finally found a place through a property dealer, a 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood. The price was reasonable, and the dealer assured me that the house had no past issues, though it had been vacant for a while. It was located in a peaceful residential society, the kind where people minded their own business. The streets were lined with old houses, some of them well kept, others looking abandoned. The dealer told me the previous owner had moved abroad, leaving the house unoccupied. Everything seemed perfect. On my first night, as I was shifting my furniture, I noticed something odd. The man living next door stood at his window watching me. His gaze was unbroken, almost unsettling. He never stepped out to offer help or even acknowledge my presence. I waved at him, trying to be polite, but he didn't respond. He just kept staring. Something about his posture felt off, but I brushed it aside. People could be strange, and I had more important things to do than worry about an unresponsive neighbor. The next day, I finished moving in and officially started my life in the new house. As soon as I arrived home after work, I decided to take a proper tour of the house. The layout was spacious. 2 bedrooms upstairs, a cozy living room, and a kitchen with outdated appliances. After exploring, I went to the kitchen to cook a simple meal, but realized I was missing some essentials. I locked all the doors, turned off every light, and headed out to the grocery store. Parked my car, grabbed some bread, eggs, and a few other things, then returned to my vehicle. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed that the back door of my house was wide open. I knew for a fact that I had locked it before leaving. I stood there for a moment, staring at the open door, my mind racing with possibilities. Had I been careless, or was someone inside? Summoning my courage, I stepped in cautiously. The kitchen light was on. That was strange because I was certain I had turned off every single light before leaving. But nothing seemed out of place. No drawers open, no signs of forced entry, nothing missing. Just an unlocked door and a single light on. I told myself it was exhaustion, that maybe I had forgotten to lock it. But deep down, I didn't believe that. Feeling on edge, I decided to go straight to my bedroom and lock myself in. I thought about calling the police, but hesitated. Nothing had actually been stolen or broken. I convinced myself it was just nerves from being in a new house alone. A hot shower seemed like the best way to relax. But as I entered the bathroom, I stopped dead in my tracks. The air was thick with steam, as if someone had just used it. The mirror was fogged, and the faint scent of shampoo lingered. I hadn't taken a bath since morning. Someone had been in my house. Someone had been inside while I was gone. Panic set in. I grabbed my phone and rushed outside, dialing the police. When they arrived, they searched every inch of the house. No signs of forced entry. No footprints. No hiding spots. They asked me if I had left a window open, but I hadn't. With nothing to go on, they left, telling me to call again if anything else happened. The next morning, I decided to visit my neighbor. I wanted to ask him if he had seen anything unusual. Maybe he had noticed someone entering my house. I picked up a small gift as a friendly gesture and walked over. As I reached the front door, the door was covered with an official notice. This house had been sealed for the past 7 years by the government. I took a step back, my mind struggling to make sense of it. That wasn't possible. I had seen a man inside this house just last night. He had been watching me. I had tried to talk to him, but according to the notice, no one had lived here for years. A sick realization settled over me. The man I had seen, he wasn't supposed to be there. And if he wasn't my neighbor, then who had been watching me from that window? I had lived in my new house for barely 2 months when it happened. A quiet suburban neighborhood, friendly neighbors, and a house that finally felt like my own after the messy breakup with my ex. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a peaceful place where I could focus on my work and not have to worry about anything or anyone. That night, rain drummed softly against the windows, and a cold wind whispered through the trees outside. I was curled up on the couch, laptop on my lap, working on a project while a rerun of some sitcom played in the background. It was just past midnight when I heard it. A knock. Soft, deliberate, coming from the front door. I frowned, pausing my work. Who would be knocking at this hour? My neighbors were mostly elderly couples who turned in early, and I hadn't made any new friends in the area yet. Curious but cautious, I muted the TV and crept toward the peephole. No one was there. I stood still for a moment. The wind had picked up, making the branches scratch against the siding. Maybe it had been the wind? Shaking it off, I locked the door, just in case, and returned to the couch. But something about it unsettled me. A creeping sense of unease crawled up my spine. And then, 30 minutes later, I heard it again. Not a knock this time, a faint, rustling noise, like fabric brushing against a hard surface. It was coming from the hallway. A chill ran through me. My house wasn't big, just a small living room, a kitchen, my bedroom, and a spare room I barely used. But I was alone. There shouldn't be any noise in the hallway. I slowly turned my head toward the source of the sound. Nothing but darkness beyond the glow of the TV. My breath felt heavy in my chest. Then from the corner of my eye, I noticed something that made my heart stop. My front door was unlocked. I was sure, absolutely sure, I had locked it earlier. I swallowed hard, my fingers gripping the armrest. Something felt wrong. The room was too quiet, the air too still. I stood up carefully, grabbing my phone. My first instinct was to call someone, but who? The police? What would I even say? I forced myself to check the door, inching toward it on shaky legs. My hands trembled as I reached for the handle, when a low creak came from behind me. I turned so fast my vision blurred. Nothing. I was alone, but the feeling of being watched was unbearable. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a heavy metal flashlight, and moved toward the kitchen where I kept a knife block. If someone was in here, I needed to be ready. I stepped into the kitchen and flicked on the light. My stomach dropped. My purse was on the counter, unzipped. My wallet was missing. My hands went cold. Someone had been in here. Frantically, I checked the back door. Still locked. The windows, secure. Then how the hell did they get in? And then, as I turned to leave the kitchen, my flashlight beam caught something on the floor. Muddy footprints, leading from the back door to the staircase. My stomach twisted. The prints stopped at my bedroom door. I took a shaky step back, my breath uneven. My bedroom door was still open from earlier. Was someone in there right now, hiding, watching me? A soft exhale filled the silence, not mine. I felt it before I even heard it, the shift of the air, the presence behind me. I turned, heart slamming against my ribs, but there was nothing there. The kitchen was empty, the hallway was empty, and yet I still felt it. Someone was there. Someone was watching. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. My mind screamed at me to do something, call the police, get out, move. But fear had locked me in place, and then a sound from the living room, a soft, wet crunch, like someone taking a bite of food. Slowly, I turned my head. On the coffee table next to my laptop was a half-eaten sandwich. I hadn't made one. My stomach twisted. I backed away, my pulse hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. The operator answered. I whispered into the receiver, "Someone's in my house." The minutes stretched like hours. I kept my back to the wall, watching every shadow, every doorway. I barely breathed. By the time the police arrived, the house was empty. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing stolen, except my wallet. They checked the security footage. At 11:50 p.m., a hooded figure entered through the front door. At 11:55 p.m., the camera glitched. At midnight, the front door unlocked by itself, and at 12:30 a.m., the footage ended. Whoever had been inside, they never left on camera. I didn't stay another night. I packed a bag and left before the sun even came up. The police never found the intruder, never figured out how they got in or out. But that night, I learned something I'll never forget. When you're home alone and you think you're safe, you might not be as alone as you think. I never liked having guests over. My apartment was small, my schedule was tight, and honestly, I just valued my space. But when my old classmate, Brian, called me out of the blue, asking if he could crash for a night, I hesitated. We weren't close, but we'd had good times back in college. He sounded desperate, said he was in town for a work trip, and his hotel messed up his booking. I didn't want to be rude, so I reluctantly agreed. It was already past 10 when he arrived. He looked off. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes slightly bloodshot. He kept shifting on his feet as if he was nervous about something. But he was polite enough, thanked me several times, and dropped his bag near the couch. I told him I had work early in the morning, so I'd be heading to bed soon. He nodded and said he'd just crash on the couch and be gone by sunrise. Something about the way he sat on the couch unsettled me. He didn't lounge back or look at his phone. He just sat there, hands on his knees, staring at the blank TV screen. I shook it off and went to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. Not out of fear, just habit. At least, that's what I told myself. Around 2:30 a.m., I suddenly woke up to a faint creaking sound. Like someone was walking on the wooden floor. My apartment was small, just a living room, a tiny kitchen, and my bedroom, so every noise was amplified in the silence. I lay still, listening, my breath shallow. The air felt heavier, like something was off. Then I heard something worse, the distinct click of my bedroom door handle turning. I bolted upright. The door was locked, but someone was trying to open it. I stayed silent, hoping he'd realize his mistake and go back to the couch, but the handle kept rattling, a soft, slow, persistent sound. "Brian?" I called out. The rattling stopped immediately. Silence stretched on for too long. Then finally he spoke. "Oh, sorry, man, I got confused. Thought this was the bathroom." His voice was too calm, too casual. The bathroom was on the other side of the apartment. There was no way he'd make that mistake. My stomach tightened. "It's on the left," I said firmly. A pause, then the sound of slow footsteps moving away. I sat there, pulse racing, ears straining to hear more. After a minute, I forced myself to breathe. Maybe he was just drunk or groggy. Maybe I was overreacting. But I didn't go back to sleep. I sat in bed, listening. Every few minutes, I heard faint movements. Fabric rustling, soft breathing. He wasn't asleep. He was awake, moving around the living room. At 3:15 a.m., I heard something that made my blood run cold. The unmistakable sound of a knife being taken out of the kitchen drawer. A metallic scrape against wood. My mind raced. What the hell was he doing? Was he sleepwalking? I reached for my phone, heart hammering. I should call the police. But what would I even say? My guest, who I invited, is rummaging in my kitchen at 3 a.m. It wasn't illegal to use a kitchen knife. I decided to wait. I needed more proof that something was seriously wrong. For the next 10 minutes, I heard slow, deliberate movements. Him pacing near the couch, the occasional soft clink of metal. Then, silence. Too much silence. I leaned toward my door, trying to hear better, and then, a soft whisper right outside my door. "Are you awake?" I froze. My whole body went rigid. The voice was barely audible, but I knew it was Brian. He was standing right outside my door, whispering to me. I didn't answer. My fingers tightened around my phone. My mind screamed at me to do something, but I couldn't move. Then came the worst part. The whispering continued, but now it wasn't words, it was muttering. Fast, incoherent mumbling. I couldn't make out a single word. It sounded almost frantic, like he was arguing with himself under his breath. I started dialing 911, hands shaking. But before I could press call, the muttering stopped. A single, deep exhale. Then retreating footsteps, the sound of the couch creaking. He was back in the living room. I didn't sleep. I sat in bed until the sun started creeping through the curtains. At around 6 a.m., I heard movement again, the rustle of fabric, the jingle of keys, then the front door opening and quietly clicking shut. I waited 15 minutes before leaving my room. The living room looked the same as before, except for one thing. The kitchen knife was on the coffee table. Clean, but placed carefully in the center. I checked the front door, locked from the inside. Brian didn't have a spare key. I never heard from him again. His number was disconnected. When I asked some mutual friends, they said Brian had lost his job a month ago. He wasn't in town for work. He had no reason to be here. I don't know what he was planning that night, but I know one thing. I wasn't supposed to wake up. I have always had a strange fascination with chickens. As a kid, I spent hours watching my grandfather's small poultry farm, learning how they lived, how they reacted to people, and how they were raised for business. That interest stuck with me even as I grew older. I didn't have a stable job, and I barely made ends meet by doing odd farm work. When I saw a night shift position open at a poultry farm with high pay, I immediately applied. I needed the money, and my knowledge of poultry farms made it seem like an easy opportunity. But I had no idea what I was walking into. A struggling poultry farm was hiring cheap labor because workers kept quitting or simply disappearing. The owner, desperate to keep things running, offered the high-paying night shift job. The moment I arrived, I noticed something was off. The manager, an old man with restless eyes and shaky hands, gave me an odd warning. "Keep your head down, work fast, and don't look around too much." His nervous energy unsettled me. Why would he say that? Was it some kind of joke? Or was there a reason for his paranoia? Still, I brushed it off and started my shift. The poultry houses were dimly lit, the air thick with the stench of birds. My job was simple: check the cages, clear out any dead chickens, and ensure everything was in order. The chickens were kept outside in an open area, and the farm stretched out into the surrounding woods, giving it an isolated, eerie feel. Late into the night, the rain started pouring. Heavy drops pounded against the metal roofs, and I had to hurry to get the chickens inside. If they got too wet, diseases could spread, and that was bad for business. As I rushed to herd them into the sheds, I felt a pair of eyes on me. I turned, expecting to see the manager or another worker, but no one was there. Just endless rows of cages in the darkness beyond. Later, I met another worker who had been there for a few weeks. He pulled me aside, lowering his voice. "If you ever feel like someone is watching you, don't react. Just keep working." His face was pale, his hands trembling. His fear was real, and that disturbed me more than his words. The first night passed normally, but the second night was different. I arrived at the farm, went straight to the chicken shed, and began checking the cages. I bent down to remove a dead bird. I heard shuffling footsteps behind me. I assumed it was the manager or other worker and turned around to see, but no one was there. I forced myself to stay calm and ignore the bad feeling. I continued my work, sat with chickens, and cleaned their area. After completing my work, I went back to my small room near the poultry houses and sat on the chair to see that everything is all right and started using my phone. After 30 minutes, I noticed something strange: an ID card lying on the floor. The name on it wasn't familiar, but the face was. I had seen this worker in the hiring records, but he was listed as missing. I called the manager and told him someone had left their ID in my room. After long silence, he responded. His voice was tight. "Just forget about it." Then he hung up. Something was very wrong. I was ignoring the straying things on poultry farm to save my job. I went back outside to check on the chickens. As I went inside the shed, I noticed that they were eating, like someone had fed them recently. Someone else was here. I decided to went inside my room and lock myself until morning. As I was moving outside the shed, I saw the hidden locked barn inside the shed. I had never noticed it before. It was set apart from the poultry houses, partially hidden behind tall grass and an old fence. I had an overwhelming urge to see what was inside. When I got close, I realized the door wasn't fully locked. With a gentle push, it creaked open, revealing a hatch in the floor. I climbed down carefully, with the help of my phone's flashlight. The underground room was humid, filled with a faint smell of rot and sweat. Then my light landed on something that made my stomach drop. Rows of cages, not for chickens, but for humans. And there I saw the missing workers. Their eyes were hollow, their bodies weak and bruised. Some had bandages, others had fresh wounds. One of them lifted his head and whispered, "Leave." My hands shook as I dialed the police. They told me to stay put and not go further in. But I couldn't leave them like this. I had to help. I tried to break one of the locks. I tried to talk with that worker, but he was in very bad condition. After some effort of talking to him, he finally spoke, "Leave, please." Then I heard a door open behind me. I froze and watched behind to the door. 3 men stepped into the room. One of them held a crowbar. Their faces were unreadable, their eyes dark with something I couldn't place. Then they lunged at me. Before they could reach me, the distant sound of police sirens cut through the storm, then turned and ran toward the woods. I scrambled out of the underground room just as flashing red and blue lights flooded the farm. The police stormed the place. The trapped workers were freed, and the farm was shut down. The next day, the police arrested the manager at the airport. He had been trying to flee the country. When interrogated, he refused to talk about what had been happening on the farm. But the evidence spoke for itself. The police discovered surgical tools, blood-stained tarps, and crates filled with documents linking missing persons to the farm. Their theory? Organ trafficking. Workers weren't just disappearing, they were being harvested. I had come to that farm because of my strange interest in chickens. But I had uncovered something much darker. The thought still haunts me. If I hadn't called the police in time, I would have been the next one locked inside a cage. What do you think really happened? Let me know in the comments. I read all your thoughts and reply. Moving from Washington, D.C. to Texas was never part of my plan, but with the rising cost of living and a promising opportunity, I had no choice. As a truck driver, I spent most of my time on the road, and the idea of owning a large house in a quiet neighborhood at an unbelievably low price felt like a blessing. My wife Emily and our 10-year-old son Jake were skeptical at first, but when I showed them the pictures of the house, they agreed. It was a 2-story home with a spacious backyard, and the nearest school and grocery store were just a few blocks away. Everything seemed perfect. The property dealer was hesitant when I asked if I could visit the house before purchasing it, but he eventually sealed the deal over the phone. His reluctance made me uneasy, but I brushed it off, thinking he just wanted to make a quick sale. A week later, we packed our belongings and made the long drive to Texas, excited for a fresh start. The house looked exactly like the pictures, clean, well-maintained, and oddly untouched despite being vacant for months. The neighbors were friendly enough, though they seemed to avoid talking about the house. After settling in, Jake and I took a walk around the neighborhood. The streets were quiet and everything felt normal. We stopped by the grocery store, picked up a few essentials, and returned home. Emily was still organizing the kitchen when we got back. By nightfall, we were all exhausted and went straight to bed. At around 11 p.m., I woke up with a dry throat and decided to get some water. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard a loud bang from the kitchen. I made my way to the downstairs, then to the kitchen. There I saw the freezer door was wide open, and every single item inside was gone. I stood frozen, trying to make sense of it. I checked the locks on the doors and windows. Everything was secured. Confused, I went to Jake's room to check on him. He was sleeping soundly, undisturbed. Emily, too, was fast asleep. I locked our bedroom door before going back to bed, but I barely slept that night. In the morning, Emily noticed the locked door and asked about it. I told her what had happened, but when she checked the freezer, everything was back in place. I felt foolish. Maybe I had been half asleep, imagining things. Emily teased me about being paranoid, but I was very disturbed and confused. That night, I sat in the living room, using my laptop while Jake played in his room. The house was silent, except for the occasional hum of the air conditioner. Suddenly, a piercing scream came from Jake's room. Emily and I ran upstairs to find him curled up under his blanket, trembling. "Someone's in my bathroom," he whispered. I flicked on the bathroom light, but it was empty. The fear in his eyes made my goosebumps. We let him sleep in our room that night, hoping it was just a bad dream. I lay in bed with my son and trying to make him sleep and comfortable. Finally he sleep, but I can't. Unable to sleep, I noticed the kitchen light turned on, then off. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the hallway. The air felt thick and an unnatural stillness filled the house. As I reached the kitchen, I heard a creak from the backyard door. I turned my head just in time to see and saw a massive shadowy figure, nearly 8 feet tall, stepping outside the house from the backyard door slowly. Its movement was very unnatural, as if it knew I was watching. I stood frozen, unable to process what I was seeing. Then, in an instant, it disappeared beyond the backyard fence. I bolted the door and ran back to my room, locking it behind me. The next morning, I called the police. When they arrived, I explained everything that had happened. They checked the neighborhood's CCTV footage. The camera facing our backyard door showed something that made my stomach turn. The door had opened at the exact time I had seen it, but no one had stepped outside. The officers exchanged wary glances before telling me they couldn't do much. Could be a faulty lock, one of them suggested. But I knew it wasn't. Emily and I decided we needed a break from the house. We packed our bags and drove to my parents' home in a nearby town. We planned to stay only for a few days, but I knew deep down I didn't want to go back. I put the house up for sale immediately. Weeks passed, and not a single offer came through. Word had spread about what happened, and no one wanted to live there. The house, once a dream come true, had turned into something we couldn't escape. To this day, I don't know what happened in that house. There were no ghosts, no shadows lurking in the corners, just an unshakable feeling that something was watching us. Something that didn't want us there. I had always enjoyed the quiet of the countryside, a much-needed escape from the fast-paced chaos of city life. My uncle's poultry farm, nestled deep in a rural area, seemed like the perfect place to clear my head. He had been managing it alone ever since his workers quit unexpectedly, and I figured my visit would be a good distraction for both of us. Packing my essentials, I grabbed some clothes, a flashlight, and an umbrella, as the news warned of heavy rain for the next few days. The farm was about 3 hours away, and my uncle's voice over the phone had sounded strange. His words were simple but unsettling. Come quickly, and drive carefully. Something about his tone made me uneasy, but I brushed it off, assuming he was just tired from work. It was already raining by the time I hit the highway, and as I drove deeper into the countryside, the road became more difficult to navigate. The fog thickened, and my GPS started glitching. I relied on memory to guide me. An hour into the drive, I noticed something strange in my rearview mirror. A black car trailing me. Its headlights were off. I kept glancing back, waiting for it to overtake me, but it never did. Instead, it maintained the same distance, following my every turn. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. To test if it was intentional, I changed lanes slightly. The car mirrored my movements. A cold feeling settled in my chest. I sped up. So did the car. My heart pounded harder with every passing minute. The rain intensified, making it difficult to see. But just as I neared the farm's entrance, the black car abruptly swerved onto another path and disappeared into the fog. I exhaled deeply, trying to steady my nerves. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe I was overthinking. By the time I reached the farm, night had fallen. The property was surrounded by vast, open fields, and 2 large sheds housed the chickens. My uncle stood at the entrance, his expression unreadable. "You came alone, right?" he asked immediately. His question caught me off guard.
Yeah, why?
Instead of answering, he locked the gate behind me and muttered, "Someone's been coming here at night, watching." I froze. Who? I don't know, but I hear footsteps. Things move outside. Sometimes there's knocking, and in the mornings I find footprints. He rubbed his face tiredly. At first I thought it was an animal, but animals don't knock on doors. I forced a small laugh, trying to lighten the mood. Maybe it's just the wind. My uncle didn't laugh. After dinner, I went to my guest room. The sound of the rain against the roof was oddly calming, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my gut. My uncle's paranoia was getting to me. Maybe he was just overthinking things. At some point, I dozed off. Then I woke up. I blinked, disoriented. The sound wasn't coming from the rain, it was coming from the window. Tap, tap, slow, deliberate knocking. I froze, my body instantly alert. The room was dark, but the curtains were slightly parted. My breath hitched as I turned my head toward the window. A figure stood outside. Tall, motionless, watching me. My heart pounded against my ribs. I couldn't make out a face, just a dark silhouette against the dim glow of the moon. The knocking had stopped, but the figure remained, standing unnervingly still. Then, slowly, it tilted its head to the side. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then, it was gone. Vanished into the night. I didn't sleep after that. I sat upright in bed, gripping my phone tightly, my ears straining for any sound. I considered waking my uncle, but didn't want to seem paranoid. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the shadows had played tricks on me. Morning came slowly. As soon as I stepped outside, I saw my uncle inspecting the ground near the house. His face was pale. "There are footprints," he muttered. I followed his gaze. The prints were fresh. They led from my window back toward the farm's entrance. But the gate was still locked. Whoever had been outside my window last night had already been inside the property before I even arrived. My uncle and I exchanged uneasy glances. Neither of us spoke about it, but I could tell we were both thinking the same thing. Who was watching us? And how had they gotten in? That night, I locked my room door and kept my flashlight close. I refused to sleep, my mind alert to every sound. The rain poured harder and the wind howled against the windows. Midnight came, and my uncle had already gone to bed then. Soft, careful, right outside my door. I held my breath, gripping my flashlight tightly. My phone was in my other hand, ready to call for help. The footsteps stopped just outside my door. Silence. Then, knocking. 3 slow knocks, deliberate. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay silent. The handle rattled lightly, as if someone was testing if the door was locked. My stomach twisted in fear. And then, nothing. Minutes passed. I didn't dare move. When I finally gathered the courage to check outside, there was no one there. But I knew someone had been. And whoever it was, they had wanted me to know they were there. Morning couldn't come fast enough. The next day, I told my uncle I was leaving early. He didn't try to stop me. He just gave a small nod like he had expected it. As I drove away from the farm, I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time. The farm faded into the distance, the rain blurring my vision. But just before I turned onto the highway, my blood ran cold. Standing far off near the entrance, barely visible through the fog, was a lone figure. Watching. I never looked back again. I had been searching for a job in different cities, hoping to find the right opportunity. After weeks of effort, I finally secured an interview with a well-known company in this unfamiliar city. They asked me to stay for 5 days to complete a work assessment before making a final decision. Traveling back and forth to my hometown wasn't an option. It was too far, and the expenses would be unbearable. I first considered staying in a hotel, but the prices were absurdly high. Just when I was running out of options, I found an online listing for a short-term rental, completely free for 5 days. It seemed too good to be true, but I contacted the owner, who assured me it was available. The idea of staying alone in an unfamiliar house unsettled me a little, but the urgency of my situation left me no choice. The next morning, I picked up the keys, signed a basic agreement, and moved in, telling myself it was only for 5 days. The house was in a quiet neighborhood with well-maintained lawns and a peaceful atmosphere. It wasn't large, but had everything I needed. Furnished rooms, a working kitchen, and even a small backyard. I spent the first hour exploring the space, checking each room, and making sure everything was in place. The house felt strangely untouched, as if no one had lived there for a long time. Later, I stepped outside to get some fresh air and clear my mind before preparing coffee in the kitchen. As I stirred the steaming cup, I heard a faint sound of footsteps in the backyard. I turned off the stove and cautiously stepped outside to check, but the yard was empty. The silence was thick, almost unnatural, but I brushed it off as paranoia. It was a new place, and I was alone. My mind was probably playing tricks on me. I took my coffee and went to the backyard, hoping the morning air would help me relax. Just as I took my first sip, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, I approached the front door and peered through the peephole. A man stood outside, dressed in work clothes. He introduced himself as a plumber, claiming that the house owner had sent him to fix a leaking washroom tap. I hesitated for a moment. Why would a repairman come so early in the morning? More importantly, he had no tools with him. Despite my doubts, I let him in, reasoning that the owner might have forgotten to inform me. He led the way to the bathroom and began inspecting the tap. After a few minutes, he asked for a glass of water. I stepped into the kitchen to fetch it, but when I returned, the bathroom was empty. The man had vanished. I ran to the front door and looked outside just in time to see a black car pulling away from the driveway. Something wasn't right. The house was locked from the inside. How had he left so quickly? I checked every room, but nothing seemed out of place. Trying to shake off the unease, I locked all doors and windows before heading back to my bedroom, telling myself I was overthinking things. As night fell, I tried to focus on reading, but my mind kept drifting back to the strange incident. Around 11 p.m., I finally decided to sleep. Just as I began to drift off, the doorbell rang again. My breath caught in my throat. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. Who would visit this late? Gathering my courage, I slowly approached the door and opened it. No one was there. I stepped outside, scanning the quiet street, not a soul in sight. Feeling uneasy, I locked the door and went back to my room, trying to calm myself. Just as I lay down, the doorbell rang again. This time I didn't rush to open it. I waited, straining my ears for any sound. The air in the house felt thick, making it hard to breathe. After a long silence, I decided to check one last time. When I opened the door, the street was empty, not a single movement in sight. As I turned back to my bedroom, my stomach dropped. Large, muddy footprints covered my bed. My pulse raced as I ran toward the back door, only to find it wide open, swaying slightly in the wind. My instincts screamed at me to leave. I grabbed my car keys and rushed toward my vehicle, locking myself inside. My hands trembled as I started the engine. Before driving away, I glanced back at the house. That was when I saw them. 3 figures stood by the bedroom window, staring directly at me. One of them was the so-called plumber. I had no time to think. I sped away, heading straight for the nearest police station. The officers took my report seriously and followed me back to the house within the hour. But when they searched the place, they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing out of the ordinary. The house was as I had left it, yet I knew what I had seen. One officer checked the rental listing I had used, but when he refreshed the page, it was gone, completely removed from the site. I never returned to that house. I canceled my job assessment and left the city the next morning, shaken to my core. To this day, I don't know who those men were or what they wanted. But one thing is certain, I was never meant to stay in that house. And had I stayed one more night, I might not have been able to leave at all. I had never liked working the night shift, but I needed the money. Grayson's hardware store wasn't exactly a high-end place, but it paid decently, and the job was easy enough. Most nights I spent my time cleaning up, rearranging shelves, and watching the clock until sunrise. It was lonely work, but that night I would have given anything to be alone. My coworker Jake had called in sick, leaving me as the only one on duty. Our manager, Mr. Collins, didn't seem too concerned. "Slow nights, man," he had said. "You'll be fine." I wasn't so sure. The store sat at the edge of town, surrounded by empty lots and a dimly lit road that barely saw traffic after midnight. The moment I walked in at 10:45 p.m., something felt off. Maybe it was the flickering lights in aisle 7, or the faint hum of the security cameras that seemed to cut out for a second longer than usual. Either way, a deep unease settled in my chest, but I brushed it off. It was just another long night. By 12:30 a.m., I had finished stocking the shelves and was about to take my break when the automatic doors slid open. I looked up, expecting a late-night customer. No one was there, just the empty parking lot and the cold wind rattling against the glass. I hesitated, staring at the entrance. The motion sensors weren't faulty. I had tested them earlier. Something had triggered them. My skin prickled as I walked over, peering outside. The lot was deserted. A single streetlight flickered in the distance. The wind carried loose paper across the pavement, but beyond that, nothing. I stepped back inside and locked the doors manually. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe I was imagining things. But as I returned to the counter and glanced at the security monitors, my stomach twisted. A shadow moved near aisle 10. I froze. The store had been empty all night. I stared at the screen, but the figure had already slipped out of view. My hands went clammy as I grabbed the radio from the counter. "Hello?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. Silence. Taking a deep breath, I reached under the counter and pulled out the metal bat we kept for security. My heart pounded as I walked toward aisle 10, my footsteps echoing against the tile. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows. I reached the aisle and turned the corner. Nothing. The shelves were perfectly intact, the products undisturbed. I exhaled, gripping the bat tighter. Maybe I was overtired, seeing things. Just as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A single footprint on the floor. My blood ran cold. The floors had been spotless when I checked earlier. This wasn't mine. I took a step back, heart hammering. The footprint led toward the storage room at the back of the store. The door was closed, just as I had left it, but something felt different. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move forward. My hand shook as I reached for the handle. Locked. That should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. Someone had been here. Someone was still here. I turned off the flashlight and listened. The store was silent, unnervingly so. Even the usual hum of the air conditioning seemed to have faded. Then, a noise. A faint, deliberate sound. A breath. I took a step back. My grip tightened on the bat. The security cameras. If someone was here, the cameras would have caught them. I turned and sprinted back to the counter, nearly slipping on the tile in my rush. My fingers fumbled as I pulled up the feeds. Static. The back aisle camera was out, just blackness on the screen. But for a split second, before it had cut out, I had seen something. A figure. Standing in aisle 10. I whipped around, my chest heaving. Aisle 10 was empty. The phone. I grabbed it with shaking hands and dialed 911. The call rang once, twice. Then, a soft click. No voice. No operator. Just breathing. Slow. Heavy. Then the line went dead. I stood frozen, the dial tone humming in my ear. The store was silent. Too silent. Then a faint metallic clang echoed from the back. Someone was in here. I grabbed the bat and forced myself to move, every step calculated. I stayed low, scanning the aisles. The silence pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. Then, footsteps, slow, measured, coming from the back of the store. I pressed myself against a shelf, my pulse hammering in my ears. The steps grew closer. Then they stopped, just around the corner. I held my breath. Then, in a single movement, I lunged, swinging the bat. It connected with something solid, a grunt of pain. A figure staggered back, gripping his arm. A man, dressed in black, tall, broad-shouldered. He had been watching me, waiting. I bolted toward the exit, but the doors wouldn't open. My eyes darted back to the man. He was pulling something from his pocket. My stomach dropped. A key card. My manager's key card. The one that locked and unlocked the doors. He had planned this. "You were alone tonight," he murmured. "They always leave one person alone." I didn't hesitate. I faked right, then darted left, sprinting toward the emergency exit. The alarm blared as I burst through the door into the freezing night air. I ran, my legs burning, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind me, I heard footsteps stop. I turned. He was standing in the doorway, watching me. But he didn't follow. He simply stepped back inside, and the door swung shut. The police arrived 10 minutes later. I told them everything. The security footage corrupted. No proof of the key card. The manager swore no keys were missing. They never found the man. Grayson's hardware store shut down a month later. Low sales, they claimed. But I knew better. Someone had been watching, waiting, and next time, they wouldn't leave a witness. I had always preferred solitude. That's why I chose to spend my weekends hiking deep into the national forests, away from the noise of city life. This trip was no different. I had planned a peaceful weekend alone, camping by a remote lake miles away from the nearest road. Just me, the wilderness, and the quiet hum of nature. By the time I reached my chosen campsite, the sun was beginning to set. The lake stretched out before me, its surface smooth and untouched. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, a scent I had grown to love. I pitched my tent near the water's edge, set up a small fire, and cooked a simple meal. It was perfect. I sat on a log, enjoying the rhythmic chirping of crickets and the distant call of an owl. This was exactly what I needed, a break from everything. The first night was calm, almost too quiet. I fell asleep to the crackling of the dying fire and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. But sometime in the early hours of the morning I woke up, not because of a dream or discomfort, but because something felt off. Then I heard it, heavy breathing, slow, raspy, unsteady, right outside my tent. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound was deep, human. It wasn't the short, quick breaths of an animal. It was deliberate, as if someone was standing just inches away, breathing through their mouth. My fingers tightened around my flashlight. I didn't dare move, didn't even shift my weight on the sleeping pad beneath me. The thin fabric of the tent felt like the only barrier between me and whoever, or whatever, was out there. The breathing continued, inhale, exhale, slow, uneven. I swallowed hard, willing myself to stay silent. It felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Then, as suddenly as it started, the breathing stopped. I listened. Nothing. No footsteps, no rustling, just the distant sound of water lapping against the shore. Slowly, I allowed myself to relax, but I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When the sun finally crept through the fabric of my tent, I cautiously stepped outside. The ground was damp from the morning dew, soft enough to hold footprints, but there were none. No sign that anyone had been near my tent, just my own tracks from the night before. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was the wind playing tricks on my half-asleep mind. I forced myself to go about my day as planned. I fished in the lake, hiked through the dense woods, and tried to convince myself that last night had been nothing more than my own paranoia. But then the second night came. I checked the time when I woke up, 3:12 a.m. At first, I wasn't sure why I had woken. The forest was silent, and my fire had long since burned out. Then I heard it again, breathing. Only this time it was closer. It was the same raspy inhale, the same shaky exhale, but now I could hear something else, a faint scratching sound, fingernails dragging lightly across the fabric of my tent. I gripped my flashlight and sat up, my pulse hammering in my ears. I forced my voice to remain steady. "Who's there?" Silence. The scratching stopped. Then, in the quiet darkness, a whisper drifted through the thin fabric. Low, barely audible. "You weren't supposed to wake up." A cold wave of fear washed over me. My breath caught in my throat. The voice had been so close, right outside my tent. I fumbled for my knife, but my fingers shook too much to grasp it properly. My instinct screamed at me to move, to do something. In a blind panic, I unzipped the tent in one swift motion, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the darkness. The clearing was empty. No movement, no figure retreating into the woods. But something was different. My backpack was open. The contents spilled out onto the damp ground. My knife was missing. I swallowed hard, my eyes scanning the shadows beyond the trees. There was nothing. No sign of footprints, no indication that anyone had been there. But I knew someone had been outside my tent, watching, whispering. Panic settled deep in my chest. I needed to leave, now. I grabbed my belongings in a rush, shoving everything into my pack with shaking hands. But as I reached for my phone to check the time again, a new sound made me freeze. The slow, deliberate sound of a tent zipper being opened. But my tent was already open. The sound was coming from somewhere else. My blood ran cold. I turned my flashlight toward the trees, my breath hitching in my throat. And that's when I saw it, a second tent. A small, dark-colored tent that I hadn't seen before. It was pitched just beyond the tree line, partially hidden among the thick underbrush. The zipper was halfway down, the flaps slightly open. Someone had been camping near me, watching me. I forced myself to move. My legs felt heavy, unsteady, but I ran toward my car. The miles I had hiked in didn't matter. I had one goal, get out of the forest. I stumbled through the darkness, my flashlight bouncing off the trees. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. When I finally reached my car, breathless and shaking, I locked the doors and turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, but before I could put it in drive, my headlights illuminated something in the distance. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, tall, motionless, watching me. I didn't wait to see who it was. I slammed my foot on the gas, my tires kicking up dirt as I sped down the winding road. I didn't stop, not until I was miles away, the forest shrinking in my rearview mirror. I never reported it. What would I even say? That someone had been breathing outside my tent? That a second campsite had appeared overnight? There was no proof, no evidence, just the lingering fear that whoever was out there had been there all along. And the worst part, when I got home and emptied my bag, I found something that didn't belong to me. A single dirty Polaroid, a picture of me, taken while I was asleep in my tent.